As far as release dates go, Resonance of Fate might just be the most unlucky JRPG out there. The original release of this game on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 came at the same time that Final Fantasy XIII released, and while that game has been controversial with fans over the years, to say the least, there is no denying that it was a massive game to try and compete against for a completely new IP. And now this remaster has come at the same time as Red Dead Redemption 2. Now, of course, Red Dead Redemption is a completely different game in a completely different genre, but that is an absolute behemoth to try and compete against. So, spare a thought for poor Resonance of Fate. It's always been better than what it's up against, but it has always been a David versus Goliath battle in the truest sense. I'm just starting a playthrough of the remaster, and though of course I have played it a few times on the PlayStation 3, I wanted to do a video to talk about some of the key themes of the game and show off just how impressive it is in HD. Resonance of Fate was always chalked up as a game with lower production values thanks to the relatively limited colour palette that it uses. I'm hoping with the remaster that people take a second and closer look, because that limited colour palette was a deliberate aesthetic choice, and I actually find the game to be absolutely stunning visually. Too often in video games, steampunk is over-colourful and overly chipper in tone. Steampunk, in contrasting science fiction with low technology machinery, is always much more naturally inclined towards gritty aesthetics and storytelling. For me, this is one of the relatively few games that doesn't use steampunk as a gimmick, but rather actually makes something of it, and the visuals are a big part of that. It's also so interesting that the game released at the same time as Final Fantasy XIII because thematically those two JRPGs are surprisingly similar. They look completely different, but thematically they actually share quite a lot in common. Now, without getting too spoilery, for people who haven't played this, I want to talk through those kind of points of comparison and similarity between the two games and their themes. Both Final Fantasy XIII and Resonance of Fate are very interested in the idea of human destiny versus morality, and while destiny is a common enough topic for most JRPGs, I can't think of too many that handle the topic with the kind of nuance or philosophical depth that these two do. In Final Fantasy XIII, the story spins around a group of people who are compelled into a quest when they're given something of a curse by some godlike beings. In true Final Fantasy style, it gets a whole lot more convoluted than that, to say the least, but the core of the game is how each of the characters grapples with this idea of destiny and what they're being forced to do and whether they have any control over themselves and their futures. In Resonance of Fate, all of humanity has just about died out thanks to pollution across Earth. In one small pocket of the land, a man-made structure provides a habitable environment for the survivors. But there's a catch. The entire structure is controlled by a religious group that has deified the technology, turned it into a godlike thing to worship, and that technology also means that people lose control of their futures. Their social status is determined at birth, and their exact lifespan is actually controlled through the use of special crystals which were programmed with, an expiry date. The player's team find themselves challenged by the morality of this, their understanding of their god, and so on and so forth. Now, both games are clearly tapping into various philosophical discussions around determinism. Does free will exist, or are all actions, including those that seem random, in some way the consequence of a completely rational universe? Are humans incapable of acting in any other way than what they do? And what does that mean for the concept of morality? If the universe is deterministic, are humans even capable of making moral judgments, since making a wrong moral judgment implies that you would have the ability to do something else instead? And what does that in turn mean for the idea of good and evil? Are they now irrelevant? Now, determinism is a ridiculously complex philosophy to actually follow through in full, and certainly beyond the scope of this video. But it's core to the plot of Resonance of Fate, and that also means that the game is actually a good deal more deep and complex than a lot of people initially assume. Where Final Fantasy XIII was quite indulgent in its storytelling, with long cutscenes and the like, Resonance of Fate is much more minimalist, allowing the smaller details of the environment and your own actions tell the story. As such, it's important to pay attention to every little bit of dialogue and every environment that you visit and all of that kind of thing in order to get the full scope of what's actually going on. And I also recommend that if you play this, you replay it at least once, because a lot of the stuff that happens in the first couple of chapters makes a lot more sense once you understand what the big reveals are and the conclusion of the narrative. But beyond the story, as you can see from the footage on the screen, Resonance of Fate is one heck of a visually impressive combat system. What is really amusing to me is that for all the dynamism and how exciting it all looks, it's actually quite it's a very traditional turn-based JRPG in a lot of ways, and because it is so visually dynamic, it looks quite confusing at first. I'm not even going to try and describe what the combat system is exactly like, because it's much easier to learn for yourself by playing rather than having it explained. But if you are used to turn-based JRPGs, you will find this one quite familiar and comfortable within the first couple of battles. And the point is that once you do get the hang of it all, the visual fireworks kind of never get old, and it becomes a very interesting take on turn-based gameplay. Just understand though that it is an older game as well, so if this is your first time playing it, then do yourself a favour and make sure you go and do the optional tutorial stuff in the game's arena first, because the game does absolutely nothing to walk you through it just through the normal play. It assumes that you kind of know how to play already going into it. You're just going to have to go into that arena and spend a lot of time there in order to really understand how to play the game. And also be prepared for a sharp challenge. Resonance of Fate has difficulty spikes that can be truly brutal. Truly brutal. Even compared to some of Tri-Ace's other titles, such as the Star Ocean series, Resonance can absolutely slaughter you if you're not careful. If you walk down the wrong path, if you do the wrong thing, you're going to be up against a battle that is just well beyond your ability. There is no auto-save either, so it's possible to lose hours of progress if you forget to save manually as you play along. I find it really quite interesting that all of these quality of life conveniences that we're now used to with JRPGs, such as auto-saving, such as, you know, an in-game tutorial that walks you through how to play it within the narrative itself, all of that kind of stuff has only really come through in the last generation or so. This genre has matured really rapidly, actually. And as a result, its absence from games like Resonance, even though with the 4K upgrade and, you know, the visual HD stuff, even though it looks like a very modern game, the absence of those conveniences are kind of really felt, and it does feel like an older game to play in a lot of ways. But that being said, I have spent over a dozen hours playing this over the weekend, and I have been reminded of just how good Resonance of Fate actually is. For anybody, well, I mean, sure, everybody else is out there playing Red Dead Redemption 2, let's face it, but I'm rather happy replaying what is easily one of the best and most underrated JRPGs that has ever been created. So if you haven't played this before, I really recommend it, especially if you have enjoyed any JRPG in the last generation. If you like your JRPGs to have a bit of narrative depth and philosophical depth, if you found Nier Automata, for example, to be really engaging, I recommend having a look at this one because, like I said in the video, the narrative is actually quite deep, and there is a lot to think about afterwards and while you're playing. If you missed it just because you didn't even realise it was being released at the time, here's your chance to pick it up. The effort that's gone into the HD remaster is really impressive. It's genuinely impressive, and I think you'll have a really good time with it. I think, despite some of those kind of archaic older bits and pieces that have been left over, such as the lack of autosave, I think people will still get a lot out of this game, and I think it is going to be remembered as something of a classic, even if not as many people play it as probably should. But anyway, that's my video. Thanks very much as always for watching. If you have played Resonance of Fate and enjoy it, be sure to let me know what you think about it in the comments. Always keen to meet another fan of this game. There's not that many of us out there. And we will see you at the next video, so thanks very much for watching.